to record. And I'm going to say hi and welcome everybody. This is Joe Maldonado from the Gryphons Class School of Practical Magic. And with us today we have Professor Tami Hull, who is our resident canine trainer of all kinds of dogs. And welcome, Tami. I'm glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for setting this up. Welcome, everybody.
Absolutely. And I have one question. If I can ask you, Tami, to move your phone down a little bit, because it kind of looks like your head is floating on the bridge. So there you go.
Down, like that.
There you go. Now, have fun once. I like that. That sounds really, really good. So Tami and I have known each other for over a decade or so. I don't know, maybe a decade and a half or 2 decades. And we actually met when I was doing one of the pet expos in downtown Orlando. And you had come there because you were going to meet with one of her colleagues and talk about stuff with dogs. And then Tami and I just kind of clicked and we did a whole bunch of stuff on the other side, so to speak, meaning energy work and then also dog world work. So if you can just briefly tell everybody, what is your background? What is your experience? I know what it is, but what is your specialty? Let's do that. What's your specialty in the dog world?
Troubleshooting, kind of like Ghostbusters. Are you going to call?
Yeah.
So I troubleshoot issues and basically help people understand why is your dog doing this and what you can do to correct it.
Right. And so along with that, you have over the past, I don't know how many years, put a whole bunch of different training tools together that are your toolbox. So can you just go through those and then we'll go specifically into each one. What kind of tools would you say that you're using?
It really depends on what the client needs and what the dog needs. That can be based on the client's physical ability, the dog's size, the dog's nature, the type of behavioral issue, what the issue is that they're having. I would say that the first and main tool that people need to understand is themselves. They are a tool. You are a tool. And if you can't master yourself, meaning keep your emotions balanced, you're not going to affect your dog. Your dog's going to affect you.
Right.
So the biggest tool to start off with is yourself.
Right.
And realizing that you play a part in what's going on, a big part.
And so can you give us an example, like one of your stories from your clients of how the dog's behavior affected, I can give you tons, but how the dog's behavior affected the human?
Well, typically, like if they're perhaps out on a walk and the dog sees an animal or a person or another dog and the dog immediately gets overstimulated. It could be excitement, it could be leash frustration, and the dog's just barking and pulling, and the human's trying to get that under control. And typically, what happens quite often is the human gets either embarrassed or frustrated or both, and so they start cranking on the leash. They're coming from a very frustrated, possibly even angry, upset energy, and that doesn't tend to help the situation at all. If we can try to take a breath and realize the dog doesn't know that he's having this kind of impact, then if the human can take control of their own emotions and realize the dog doesn't know what he's doing isn't proper, let me focus on what I need to do to help him understand and communicate that message. And that's where tools can assist the human in bridging that communication gap and help make it less physical on the human.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen it go full circle where if, for example, the human is walking the dog and the dog becomes reactive to I don't know, a yellow mailbox, for example. So therefore, the next time they come to a yellow mailbox, maybe the dog is fine, but the human's reacting to, oh my gosh, here we go again. We're gonna see that yellow mailbox, and the dog picks up on that. And so I think
Correct.
what you were saying before is like, so then the dog becomes the one that's impacting the situation rather than the human guiding the dog.
Correct. Yes. Humans, we tend to hang on to things that have happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
The dog doesn't as much, but he feels that human's energy shift because they go, oh no, here comes another dog.
Right.
And that shift, the dog senses it, and he's like, oh yeah, I see it. Let me get it.
Yeah.
Let me react too. And if the human starts yelling, no, 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 and the dogs bark, 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 you're basically both barking.
Yes.
And you're not helping the situation become resolved in a calm manner.
Right. That's I have seen that. So talk about your tools. I know ECollar was one of those tools that we're going to talk about. What other tools are there to help the human regain control again?
There's all kinds of tools on the market. The tool that I mainly use is a slip lead.
Mm-hmm.
There is typically people have a flat collar on your dog. That's just the kind that either buckles with an old-fashioned buckle,
mm-hmm.
or that clicks together. Most
Yes.
people have that on. All that is a safety for me.
Yeah.
That's a secondary device where I'm going to hang dog tags, and I'm going to click a safety line to my slip lead or a prong collar or a pinch chain. That's a safety that gives you no way to truly influence the dog.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I'm not saying don't use those, but those are for dog tags and a secondary device.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ones that I typically have my clients use is a slip lead.
Right.
And either there's a couple of positions that can be used, and that gives you a little bit of ability to influence the dog through my main teaching concept, which is pressure and release.
Mm-hmm.
Because dogs understand pressure, and they understand pressure going away.
Mm-hmm.
If another dog, say a pack of wolves, if the alpha wolf is eating and another dog tries to come in, all that alpha has to do is look at it
Mm-hmm.
and put the pressure of its eyes on that dog, and then he'll follow it up with physical pressure if he has to.
Right.
So dogs can understand pressure, and they can understand the release, and that's the biggest way I communicate to them. Mm-hmm. is through that, either that slip lead, that prong collar, that e-collar. It's all the same concept. It's the pressure that I disagree with what you're doing, mm-hmm. and I hold that pressure until they stop what they're doing, and then I redirect them to what I want them to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I know there's a lot of folks out there don't really understand how an e-collar works, and there's different types of e-collars, of course. Could you explain how does an e-collar work?
Well, there's a lot to it. Just basically, it is a electric stem collar. There are some on the market that will just vibrate, some that will do an audio, a sound, and there are some that also will have an electronic stem. Mm-hmm. And most people don't understand that electronic stem, and they think that it's a horrible thing, that you're like shocking them like maybe an invisible fence. Mm-hmm. But the concept of the e-collar is to use it in the most fair and at the lowest level possible for the dog to feel it in that moment.
Feeling the vibration, or feeling a stem kind of?
The stem, the electronic stem. Now, some dogs will work off vibration. The only problem with the vibration on those collars is most of them cannot be increased in pressure. When the dog is doing something that you don't want it to do, and you start the vibration, you can't increase the pressure. And you have to be able quite often to increase pressure depending on the timing of when you noticed it and when you started applying the pressure,
Mm-hmm.
and how motivated the dog is to stay on what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And
A lot
I
of
know that a lot of people think they can just go out and get an e-collar and then use it. And there's a lot of training that has to go into that, correct?
There is, and there's a lot of e-collars on the market, and most of the ones in most of your basic pet stores are going to be a lower quality. They're not going to be as fair to the dog because they don't send the same amount of stim at the same level in the same manner each time. So the message becomes confusing to the dog because it doesn't feel the same each time. So they never fully can understand what you're trying to communicate to them. So I always go for a higher end product that is more reliable in the way that it sends the energy and at the level that it sends the energy each time. And that's going to be more of your high-end sporting dog collars, like for hunting and stuff that have longer range. They're made by companies that really do a lot of testing to make sure that their products are fair. And as I said, they just provide that same level of stim each time you set it. If you set your e-collar on a level 2, it's always going to deliver at a level 2. It's not going to be what we call hotter, and therefore the dog's getting a fair chance with the e-collar, and the communication can be more clear. So there's definitely a lot of e-collars on the market. So back to how it works. Yes, there are some that will tone. There are some that will vibrate. I think one of the companies that that makes a better product, they just came out with, I believe they came out with a vibration one that can be increased, but I haven't seen it or used that one. But then a lot of them have the electronic stem, which basically feels like static. I usually have a client feel it so that they can understand. And there's a couple that I use. One of them can go from 1 to 120. One of them has only 7 settings, but it just depends on which device is selected. So on the one that goes from 1 to 120, that device, a lot of times I can have a dog working in the low teens, sometimes even lower, depending on how sensitive they are. So I cannot feel it until it's at least, say, somewhere between 15 and 20, and it feels like static in my hand. And so when I let the clients feel it, they realize, oh, that's not bad. Now, yes, as you increase, it becomes sharper and a little bit more energy is delivered. But those are extreme cases where you might have to increase the pressure to that. If the dog's in high drive, it's going to take a little more pressure to get their attention off what they're focusing on. It's like I tell people, it is the equivalent of me sitting in a library with you and we're whispering. And you can hear me because there's no distractions and it's very quiet and nobody's speaking loud. So you can hear me whisper. But if I go outside and a rock concert's going on and we're standing by the speaker and I continue to whisper, you will not hear me because there's too much going on. You're completely distracted. I'm still whispering. So my voice, I need to raise it to get your attention. And so I can do that with an e-collar. I can increase the amount of pressure to match the situation at hand. It's kind of like a child sitting watching TV. We've all been there when we were kids. You're watching TV and you're glued to the TV and your mom comes up and flicks you in the head and says, hey, and you're like, what? And she's like, I've been calling you for 5 minutes to dinner and you had no clue, right? So sometimes you've got to increase the pressure depending on the situation.
Right. And your experience in using the e-collar and training, how fast will a dog respond with the correct behavior you want? And from the time you put the collar on the first time until?
I mean, it depends on the individual dog. Some dogs are more aloof, some of them are a little bit more stubborn, but usually the first time you put it on, you can start to see how they respond. Um, you know, and you're working them at the very lowest level that you see them feel it. And as soon as they start to feel it, you start to work with them at that level, with no distractions, just like we're in the library, because first I want to teach them the tool, and I start just walking with them and working with them, so that they get a very good foundation at that lowest level with no distractions, so that they understand, when you feel this, look to me, listen to me, I'm going to give you instruction.
Right, right. And I
It's
know.
like, I was just going to say, it's like having an invisible long leash. It can be as long or as short as you want it to be, if the dog's been taught the e-collar properly.
How much time do you spend in training a dog on an e-collar? Or does that depend on the situation too, and what you're training it to do?
You know, it does depend on a lot of factors. It depends on the type of program you're doing. You know, if it's a board and train situation, most trainers will spend probably at least 3 weeks, because they want to teach the dog a lot in the first 2, and then try to work on those behaviors and proof those behaviors for another week. Sometimes, because the dog needs so much work to help them understand something, they'll end up keeping them longer. But that's in a board and train situation. Most of what I do now is private lessons. So some of it relies on how much time the client can spend working with the dog, with the information that I've provided them and taught them in the private lesson.
Can you give us some examples of how an e-collar would be helpful? I know I've kind of segued from using it to my bratty teen, and we're going to talk about teenagers, bratty teen dogs. But I know I mainly started using it because I wanted to teach her not to walk in front of me, behind me, not to pull me, because she's in training to be a service dog, so she needs to keep pace with me. So that's actually how we began. But of late, because she is a teen, a rebellious teen right now, and she kind of bullies the other dogs around here with her weight now that she's feeling good and getting big. So we've kind of taken and starting to use the e-collar in the house. So when I see her, again, body language, when I see her approaching another dog, you know, in our pack, that she's just about ready to bully, you know, then it's the vibrate, and she automatically responds to the vibrate. You know, I don't even have to use any of the stem controls. So that's like my example. But what other examples can you give them as to how the e-collar can be used in what situations?
I mean, typically, I don't e-collar. I don't recommend e-collars to every person I work with, because they may not need it. But a lot of times I'll recommend it for somebody with a larger dog, which you have, for a dog that's got a lot of high drive. But you know, sometimes what I use it for is just as an adversive. I had a client that has a dog that has some issues, orthopedic issues.
Yes.
And the dog wants to chase the deer on their property, and they don't want the dog to, because they're afraid it will hurt itself and aggravate its condition.
Yeah.
So in that case, what we're working on is trying to first teach the dog the e-collar so that she understands it. And then we're going to work on, once she understands the e-collar, then we're going to use it to be able to call her off before she goes into that drive and injures herself. I had another client that had a dog that kept running around from the backyard, and they had a large property. She would run from the backyard out front every time they heard a vehicle out front on the road. And in doing so, the dog was running into a big pond out front that had a bridge over it that went to the other side, and the dog was going up into near that pipe, and they were afraid it was going to go in there and get hurt on something, bit by something. And so we used an e-collar to be able to call the dog off and train it to stay in the backyard. If it started to run towards the pond, we could turn it around. Right then, it was at the rock concert next to the speaker, and so we had to increase the e-collar, but we were able to turn the dog around in a full run headed towards the pond by a tap of that e-collar.
Right, right. So I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in a little chat box in the corner here. We're going to continue chatting on the record here. So what kind of behaviors should the owner of the dog specifically be looking for? Like I know timing has a whole bunch to do with when you press that button on your remote for the e-collar, but what kind of dog behavior are you looking for? Like for example, a dog is going to chase a deer. What body language are you looking at the dog to display before, right before you press that button?
It's typically the dog's gone from a much more relaxed mind. Their body language is relaxed. They might just be sniffing around in the yard or laying down or something, and all of a sudden you'll see them go into an alert where their chest and head will kind of raise up, the ears are perked up, the eyes will start to dilate if you're close enough to see that. But you will see their body language changing to where they're becoming very alert or something. And that's when I would say, don't get nervous. Just be ready that you may need to tap them. You could even tap them right then at a much lower level than if you wait too long. Just give them a little tap at their training level and say, whatever your word is, relax, down, wait. And the dog should be able to respond just like they were in the library, because you caught them when they were just starting to get distracted, because that timing is so important. The earlier you recognize that the dog is alerting to something, the lower you'll have to use the e-collar, the lower you can use the e-collar, because they haven't gotten in front of the speaker at the rock concert. Timing is essential, but surveying your environment is important as well. But if the human goose and doesn't notice something in the environment because the dog was paying more attention, then you're going to have a little bit more difficulty and have to increase your e-collar to get their attention off it. The main thing is to disrupt what they're focusing on so that they can hear you give them a command. And then you can get their attention.
And we have a comment here, and I can totally relate to this. This is for her dog who has been trained with the beep on the e-collar, and now he is afraid of all beeps and buzzes. What does she do now?
Well, you're going to probably have to stop using the beep or do some counter conditioning with that beeping noise. You could try, hang on 1 second, I got a tickle in my throat. Okay, counter conditioning, I don't know whether you can adjust the volume. Typically you can't, but maybe you can muffle it a little bit with like a pillow or something, and then have the ability to beep, 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 but also have something that the dog can kind of lick at. Like they make little lick mats that you can smear peanut butter or cream cheese, or hold a Kong with some peanut butter. Or something they can kind of lick and nibble at that you hold in your hand, like something high value, like maybe a hot dog or a chicken tender. But we're not trying to be a Pez dispenser and just give them treat after treat after treat. We want to engage that licking motion, because there's something very soothing about it that'll trigger in the brain and start to create an association of that noise being something positive. So you start the dog off licking, and then you hit the beep, and then if they pause, then wait for them to start licking again, and then beep. So every time they stop, you hold off for a moment, wait for them to go back to looking at the item, and don't let them go into flight. You should have them on a leash
Okay.
where you can keep them from running away.
Hmm.
So, or you can have somebody else in the room hold the collar and make the beep with more space in between.
So the collar is not actually on the dog, right?
No,
It's just the
no,
beep. Someone's
yeah,
holding the collar.
yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't have it that close to the dog to start off with.
Yeah.
I would say it needs to be a little muted or farther away, give them that space,
Right.
and kind of, because if it's too close, it's going to set them off immediately. So
Yeah.
I'd create space or mute it somehow. Like I said, maybe muffle it with a pillow, and then counter condition using something that's high enough value that they want to keep looking at it,
Right.
and let the brain kind of reset and see if they'll reset to, over time of continuously practicing this with them and
Right.
working with them, see
Right.
if you can counter condition the mind to accept the sound as a positive thing.
Right. Right. How long does that process take? I mean, I know it depends on the dog, but typically, I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, I know you're going
And
to say
I
that.
can't answer that. That depends on the dog.
Yeah. And
You
how often,
know,
I guess, you do it, you know, and all that kind of stuff, right? That goes with that.
there's too many variables.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and the dog may never accept the beep. You know, that just might be it, but you can certainly try counter conditioning.
Okay.
You know, and trying to do other distracting things to help the dog move through it. And you might be able to improve the
Maybe other
behavior.
sounds also that it responds to. Work on those sounds also. So, because I think
Yeah, I mean,
beeps and buzzes, so that's like two different things to me. Yeah.
so you would do the same thing, like put peanut butter on lick mat, or a good one is to take a wooden spoon, not metal,
Yeah. Yeah.
freeze the peanut butter to it,
Yeah. Oh, okay.
and then that way it takes them a lot longer to lick at it,
Yes.
you know, and have them licking at that while, you know, you have that sound.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And each time they stop because of the sound, just pause a moment. Don't talk a lot to them. That's not going to help. They're
Yeah.
not human. That's just going to confuse them and make them more anxious. Just let them stay there, be there with them, and try to bring them back to the item. But it might take something high valued, depending on the dog itself and how food motivated they are.
I know our time is running out, but we have another question. What about my monster that is out of the gate the second I get her out of the door? She is well trained in the house and places until I release her, but as soon as I release, she is off to the races, 80 pounds, 2.5 years old.
What is, I assume they want to know how to stop the dog from doing that.
Yes, I think so. I think that's what I got out of this read. That is, she is out of the gate the second she lets her out the door. So she goes out of the door and runs right out the gate, is my take on that.
I mean,
So I guess stopping her from doing that.
yeah, I would say maybe you need to work at the door with, I'm not sure whether there's already a release command that's happening, and then as soon as the release command's given, the dog's just off like a rocket, or whether it's just a matter of we need to do some training at the door that that you don't go flying out.
So it's we're talking about the right subject. Okay.
The correct as in she gives a release command and then it shoots like a rocket.
That I don't know. It just came through as that's correct. So
Okay,
we're on the topic, so we'll go with it.
it sounds like maybe we need to establish a boundary at the door, and slow them down. A lot of everything's done in baby steps. So go to the door. The dog's on leash. I would start taking the dog out on a leash. So they can't just fly out. But I would work them at the door. I would first have them calm down, sit.
Yeah.
If they're not calm, the door's not coming open. So the problem is
Yes,
shifting the
after I
state of mind.
release her, she runs like a rocket. So that's, yeah.
I mean, that one's going to be difficult for me to troubleshoot without more information. If the dog's released, I'm not understanding why it's a bad thing that it's running like a rocket if a release command was given.
Right.
I heard something about a gate.
Right. So, well, I can maybe my example at home, we have 4 dogs, and they typically, they go out at once, but they don't go out, they go out in order. So our chain of commands is everybody wait, and they wait their turn. They go out in seniority, in order of seniority, and they get released by their name. When they come to the door, the command is still wait. And for Enoch, because she's a rebellious teenager that digs and runs and wants to go crazy because she feels great. So her release was a little bit different. So her commands are wait, and then after she waits, then it's release slow. So there's 2 commands. So she knows slow means walk slow, and release means she can go ahead and walk, wherever she wants to, but it's slow. So if I'm standing in front of the door, she doesn't barrel me down to bolt out the door, because she was also bolting like crazy, and she is now at about 100 pounds. So I even at 20 pounds, she can't be doing that. So we've taught them that as soon as they come in, they learn they have to walk out the door slow. So maybe a series of commands is something that would be helpful.
Oh, I think I understand. I would still work the dog at the door on leash, and I would slow everything down to baby steps. The door starts to open. That doesn't mean you bum rush the door. The door does not fully open until you are calm and sitting. And then I would step out the door and with a wave of a hand invite them out. And yes, I will use a word for my dog. I use the word easy. If she's starting to move too fast, whether we're walking and she's off leash, I'll just holler up easy, and she will slow herself down. So it would take some very slowed down step-by-step work at the door itself.
She has broken my leg 4 times by dragging me. She is a pit lab mix, so I will have to train her to walk slow. How can I do that, and when would I correct her with the e-collar?
There's so much training that needs to be done with that. I can't just tell you when to correct her with the e-collar. First, you have to create an understanding of the e-collar with the dog, and you need to have rules and boundaries in your home that help the dog understand its position in your home, and that being kind of crazy isn't okay. And then I wouldn't take the dog for extended walks until I can walk the dog calmly just around in the driveway or back and forth in front of my house. I would work more on the quality of that walk versus the quantity of distance you get, because that will tire the dog as well. Having them have to think about, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. What am I supposed to do? So it sounds like the dog in general needs some basic training to help it understand how to walk on a leash. It doesn't sound like the dog knows how to properly walk on a leash. Right. And when I say leash, I combine leash with e-collar if that's what the client would like. Or we can just try with a leash. It depends on how the dog's responding and whether the client wants to e-collar train them. I mean, because there's just a lot that goes into that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I can be on this with you all day and talk about training in dogs, but our time is up. So what I would like to do, because we have a question here with regards to brands and manufacturers of e-collars, which we really can't do. We can't endorse any specific brands while we're recording this, and it gets posted on YouTube. So I will what I will do is stop recording. Thank everybody for coming
Okay.
to this. And everybody just stay on the line after I stop recording. And then we can talk about different brands and companies, and you can ask Tami any other questions you have by unmuting yourself. So on that note, I want to say thank you everybody for coming today. And make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have tons of free videos, lots of stuff on dogs and canines, and all kinds of very interesting subject matter. So thank you everybody, and see you later.